Faster by, good afternoon. Welcome to Mannin Line on Max Radio. Between now and 1, we'll talk about housing. It's an often vexed question on the Isle of Man, with the cost of private rentals seemingly going up and up, and a lack of supply for social housing. So, today we have Devon Watson, who's on the Executive Committee of Douglas City Council and Chair of the Housing and Property Committee, and David Ashford MHK, Chair of the Government's Housing and Communities Board. So, we'll see where we get in the next hour. By all means, get in touch, text, email, call and WhatsApp if you have something to say. Then do get in touch. And, Faster Mike, good afternoon. Welcome, Devon. And David, good to have you. Good to see you.
Hi, great to be back on.
Okay, so the big news, Devon Watson, is that Lord Street Flats up for sale.
Yeah.
How long has this been in the planning?
So we've been working the planning for this as soon as we started work on Peel Road, the replacement apartments for Lord Street, and the planning has been ongoing. We've got a 10-year housing strategy that plots out how many houses we want to build over the next 10 years, the sort of communities we want to build, and the sort of conditions we want to provide for tenants. And a lot of that time has been involved in sort of carefully managing that transition and trying to work out how do we get best value for ratepayers.
Yeah. Everything okay? Because those new flats on the Peel Road look spectacular. They look lovely. Everything okay with them?
Oh, yeah, fantastic. So what we wanted to do with those is build a brand new vision for social housing. So just because you are struggling, or if you're poor, or if you've got a circumstance that forces you to be in social housing, and a lot of these people are the essential workers that make the economy run, that we absolutely rely on to do absolutely everything. And this was indicated most sharply during COVID. You shouldn't have bad accommodation simply because you don't work in a good office block in Athol Street. I say this as one of those workers myself. And I think it's really, really important that we give people good accommodation for a low cost.
Okay. David Ashford, so you were a councillor in Douglas. When was it, David?
8.5 years I was there for, Andy, 2008 to 2016.
Okay. How do you feel? You're not nostalgic about the Lord Street flats, are you? Happy to see the back of them?
I am happy to see the back of them. I was a councillor that represented that area, and there's been problems with them for many, many years. The council did their best to try and upkeep them, but what has been done as a replacement, credit to the council where it's due, is absolutely fabulous. It's the type of accommodation that social housing should be in the 21st century. And so I don't think the Lord Street block had a future because there is issues with the fabric of that building. Okay.
So do we know, or do you know, Devon, where the what's next really when Lord Street has gone? Any more social housing to come in Douglas?
Well, 100%. So we've got a number of plans in place, and that's dependent on how we work out funding and loan arrangements with us and central government. We've had a lot of very, very productive meetings with myself and the Executive Committee, David Ashford over here, and the Treasury Minister. We've got a really productive, good relationship there, and we're trying to do as much as we can, even though there is an economic crisis, to get as much social housing as possible.
Okay, so Douglas Council, just draw a pencil line around this, David Ashford. So we've got Williston, Annika, Rose, anywhere else?
What's termed the Olympia estate. So for Douglas Council, you've got Marathon Drive, Victoria Crescent, and the estate round there as well, and also James Street and King Street. Mustn't forget those.
I was going to say,
and Lennox Park as well.
Can't forget Lennox Park, and Hillside Avenue is also yeah.
So James Street and King Street look remarkably similar to the Lord Street flats. Any plans for James Street and King Street, Devon?
So yeah, our core objective is to do a survey of all properties that we have over the next few years, and sort of get that funding, get a complete schedule on that maintenance, and know exactly where we are. So one of the big issues we have is that data collection, and that's something that we're busy rectifying at the moment. Really, really good discussions with Treasury to get that sort of funding in order to go out and do that. And hopefully, so what we've done is, rather than building a lot of housing, our core priority has been doing a lot of that maintenance. That's what we've been doing. And ideally, we get to a point where we have enough information to solve issues before they crop up. So we know that your door will need to be replaced in 2 years. So we'll go in and do that sooner rather than later, before it actually gets to the point where it's falling apart. That's the ambition that we want to get to. That's the sort of plan.
Okay. What's the formula, David Ashford? What's the equation about the funding of this? Where does the money come from?
So we had a brief discussion, I think the last time I was on the Mannin Line, Andy, about this, about the deficiency and the way it works.
Yeah.
So basically there is the amount that's raised by rental in social housing. That doesn't cover the full cost. There is a percentage of that is allowed to be retained by the local authorities for maintenance. There's a percentage that's retained for administration. And then basically the rest goes towards the cost of the actual social housing itself, the loan repayments, etc. And the difference between is what is termed the deficiency, and that is picked up by the taxpayer via a budget in whichever department actually holds the responsibility for housing, which at the moment is Department for Infrastructure.
Okay, so once Lord Street, I mean, at the moment, say as much as you can, Devon, but where are we with the sale of Lord Street? Any interest? I mean, it's with Black Grace Cowley, I believe, isn't it?
It is. Obviously, there's limits to what I can say, given the fact that this is a commercial contract and this is national radio. And yeah, so the core objective is to sort of get the best price for people as possible and get that site developed. The absolute scenario we want to avoid is one in which that building sort of sits empty, and that's something that we really want to avoid. But there has been a little bit of interest so far, but we're going to see what the market yields.
What do the tenants think? The tenants who live opposite Lord Street flats and King Street and in James Street, what's the feeling amongst the tenants? Do they want to get out? Are they nostalgic for it? Do they like where they are?
I mean, I think it's difficult to generalize on the concerns of all tenants because everybody has an independent relationship with their home. I've worked with quite a few tenants within both of those buildings and within both of those sites. Some people would like to move to new places, and we desperately need the social housing in order to get them into those places. No one should live in sort of substandard accommodation. And at the same time, a lot of people are nostalgic and they've got deep connections to these places. These are places that they've lived in since they were fairly young. These are places that your home, you feel attached to it.
Okay. What's the situation? There's some maintenance, isn't there? There's works going around the Williston area as well at the moment. How's that programme going?
So as the constituency MHK as well, I can probably say, I mean, the refurbishment programme for Williston has been going on for a number of years now. It has generally fixed the problems that were there on the estate. The much better solution, which Douglas Council, when I was there, was actually pushing for at the time, personally, I still think would have been demolishing and rebuilding like we did in Pulrose. But the government treasury at that time was not supportive of that proposal. So the council stuck with the refurbishment. But it is cracking on. There has been a slight interval because of issues around timing of release of fundings and getting the contractors on board. But it is now back up and running again. And of course, one of the big developments in Williston is the flats across from the shop, Andy, where the council has invested a large amount of time and money into actually building that new block across, which will be absolutely excellent when it's completed.
Well, you preempted Vanessa, who dropped a note in. Vanessa just said, why, when Pulrose was bulldozed and rebuilt from the ground, why didn't that happen? Was it purely money?
Well, I can answer that because I was chair. I was in Devon's position at that time. Well, the actual push from the council was for demolition and rebuild, because if we demolished Williston as it is now and rebuilt, we'd probably have fitted, at the time I think it was estimated, between 60 and 80 more houses on the estate without compromising on space as well, because it is a very strange setup the way they built Williston. But at the time it was felt that wasn't actually the most cost effective way to go, and that in fact a external refurb to fix the issues was a much better way to go. My personal view has never changed. I still think the demolition and rebuild would have been the better option, but we are now stuck where we are with decisions that were made many, many years ago by governments of that day.
Okay, Devon Watson, any plans for anything else? I mean, what else is on the horizon after Lord Street has gone, and obviously the Peel Road flats have been a success? What's next? Which site's next? Can you say anything about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, as David said, we're going to be opening up a brand new set of apartments, about 48 over there in Williston itself, and that should in itself replicate the success of Lord Street. Replicate the success of Peel Road apartments, which replaced Lord Street. And yeah, so that should be able to, we can move people in there. And then once we've freed up some of that housing, you currently do have a lot of folks who sort of sit in a large home who want to downsize. And once we move people into some of those apartments, we'll be able to get more people into family homes and allow people to be able to start families. But our 10-year plan is really, really innovative. And quite forward-reaching, and what we're really keen to do is continue that. So if we had the ability to have that funding, then we would build a lot more housing. So just touching on what David said earlier on regarding the deficiency, the great thing about that is because about 90% of the cost of any new project is paid for by the tenants themselves over the lifetime that they're in the property. You spend £20 million building a apartment block, take that down by 90%, that cost at the end of the day is close to $2 million for the taxpayer. And that number can be reduced by increasing certain efficiencies. That number can be reduced by changing the formulas and how the rents work a little bit. But generally, that's a really, really, really good deal for the taxpayer. Because at the end of the day, you've now got 50 people or 100 people, depending on the size of it, who have much, much greater stability. And giving some decent housing is so much cheaper for the taxpayer than paying out that benefit in benefits or even paying that out in other ways. So when people don't have housing, apologies for sort of the soliloquy here, but when people don't have housing, the taxpayers bear that cost anyway, in terms of greater costs on the NHS when housing is inadequate, in greater costs in policing when communities are unstable, in greater costs in social services when mental health is worse. So if we can get more of that funding, we can do that job and we can solve a lot of the issues surrounding poverty on the Isle of Man.
How many people are on the list for a council property, do you know?
Roughly 250 at the moment.
Is that fairly stable?
So that does rise over time, and one of the reasons why that does rise is because we're one of the few jurisdictions who doesn't have any regulations, or very few regulations, surrounding the control of private rental in terms of the quality and standards there. And I do appreciate that there are issues that we don't want a mass exodus of landlords from the market, but it does put a lot of pressure on social housing waiting lists. And the gap between private rents and social housing rents just continues to grow. So people are desperate for more housing, and this is one of the best ways to provide it.
Okay, let's get to the lines then. And Andrew's first with us. You're live with Councillor Watson and David Ashford MHK. Andrew.
Hi, good day to you all. Please, how will the proceeds from the sale of all Lord Street flats be ring-fenced for the building of new apartments, etc., and won't be used for extensive refurbishment projects or otherwise squandered on other projects?
Okay, did you get that? How will the proceeds be ring-fenced?
Okay, well, this is something that we can do internally within the council. This is something that we can pass via an internal resolution. But David?
So there is actually set rules around when properties are sold. So if social housing properties are sold, even if they're vacant properties, then the money is automatically ring-fenced to be spent back on housing. It goes back into the housing fund to be spent in that way. So there is already rules and criteria around that. You can't just sell social housing here on Ireland and then spend the money in a different area. It's got to go back into the housing fund.
Okay, I mean, can you make an estimate, a guess really, of how much that site's worth?
Well, at the time when it's actually on the market and they're looking for bids, Andy, I don't think Douglas Council would be too impressed with me if I went out with a figure. All bidders welcome, I think, is what Devon would probably agree with.
100%. I think something is worth what someone is willing to pay for it at the end of the day, and I think that there is a big difference in terms of we are very keen to sort of look at the social value. So, for example, if someone who wanted to just turn that house into cheap bedsit squats that were even lower quality than the previous Lord Street, but they would offer us a higher figure than someone who really wanted to refurbish it up to a really decent standard, then obviously we would go for the option that has greater social value. As public bodies, you can't only look at a profit and loss sort of equation of things. You also have to look at what site is best for Douglas. This is one of the things that you see as you enter into the town. This is a focal point of our city. So it's absolutely essential we get that best value, and that's going to be factoring into the price.
So the council will be almost choosing which is the best option.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're the seller, so 100% we'd be adjudicating who who gets that at the end of the day.
Okay. Black Grace Cowley it is, by the way, if you want to take a look at one. Andrew, did you have anything else?
I did a very quick one as Devon councillors on. Who please brought the designs and supplier of the new bench seats on the promenade to the council, and how much has that order cost the ratepayers?
Okay, very quickly.
Okay, I'm going to be completely honest. My committee is housing. Whilst that was voted through in Regen, that's something I don't actually have the direct answers for. I'd highly recommend. But if you were to shoot me an email, I'd be able to sort of get that information for you. But I've quizzed up on housing costs today.
Okay,
so
that's fine. That's perfectly understandable. What's your email address, Devon?
Councillor CLLR .dwatson@douglas.gov.im.
Okay, let's go to next. We've got Robert who's with us. Hi, Robert.
Hi, how you doing? I was just going to ask Devon, could I ask him, are there less than 650 people on the waiting list for the allotments over in the Boats for Cabin Hotel?
The allotments?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the allotments aren't really something that I deal with, and I wouldn't be able to really give you an honest answer there on that one. Allotments at the same time as well, handled by Regen. I think if this is something that is directly council related.
Okay, but it's interesting to note, although we're talking about housing, obviously there are some fairly substantial allotments in and around Douglas.
Yeah.
What was the council's view of allotments when you were in, David Ashford?
So that was when the allotments committee started up. So the allotments are across from the Williston estate, the upper part of the lawn cemetery.
Yeah.
That was established during the 8.5 years I was on the council. It was seen as a good use of the land because eventually that land will actually merge to form the upper part of the cemetery there, and it seems to have proved immensely popular. If indeed, as the caller says, there is an extensive waiting list, I think that just shows how popular it's been in what the council's provided there.
Okay, David.
Just one thing we have pushed for is to sort of see if there's any ways that we could sort of integrate some of those allotment policies within pre-existing estates, because I do think that giving people access to the ability to garden is absolutely essential. And sometimes people do live in apartments, and you shouldn't be completely disconnected from the process of nature or growing food or being able to grow things just because you happen to live in a town.
Yeah.
So that is something we have to invest in.
Yeah, well, it's good for mental health, and it's good for growing potatoes and things like that.
100%.
Okay, David, you're live with Devon Watson and David Ashford.
Oh, hi, Randy. It's about affordable housing. It seems to be the buzzword in government at the moment, or what it has been for the last few years. And yet, on the 1st of January next year, new legislation comes in that you can't put fossil fuel appliances into new builds, which basically government-owned legislation makes affordable housing less affordable for people who want to buy. And what I'd like to know is, if the government is going to put approximately £30,000 plus on the cost of a new build, why isn't government paying for it? Why has it come down to the ordinary person in the streets who wants to get on the property ladder to incur this huge cost, which basically wipes out a lot of people out of the property market for first-time buyers?
David Ashford?
Well, firstly, I'm not sure I quite agree with that figure, David, of the 30,000 on top, because that's certainly not what's being seen in the property market. For instance, the new estates that are already future-proofing themselves and actually putting non-fossil fuel boilers, etc. in, if you actually look at the market price for those, they're not substantially different to those that are coming on the market in the affordable bracket with fossil fuel boilers. So I'm not convinced it is going to have that dramatic effect that is being suggested in some quarters. Certainly in other countries that are already ahead of us, they haven't seen that spike in market price. And the point with affordable housing is you can control the price. So when you say about government picking up the tab, depending upon how schemes are delivered, then effectively there is a certain level of cost to government, particularly some of the things we might need to look at in the OHAN, in provision of land, etc. But I'm not going to preempt what's going to come forward in the OHAN response to Tynwald, which now looks like it will be January, at the January sitting. But one of the key things we've got to do is build more affordable housing for people. And affordable, as we had this debate last time I was on Mannin Line, affordable is basically for the median earner. Someone earning a median salary, the housing should be affordable for them.
David?
Well, I work in the plumbing and heating industry, and in a new build, for say a 2 or 3 bedroom house, you could probably put a heating system with a gas boiler in for around about £7,000. You can add another £30,000 if you want to put solar panels, air heat source, underfloor heating, upgrade your insulation. So I don't know where it is a massive increase in the cost. It's no use saying it doesn't make the houses any more. Not much more. I mean, that's the real world.
Well, I'm talking about real world figures, though. If you actually look at jurisdictions that have done this, they haven't seen that spike and differential in the price of the market of new builds. And like I say, even if you use the Isle of Man figures, where, I mean, you're talking there about including solar panels, including the underfloor heating and everything else as well, rather than just simply the boiler element or the heating element, which obviously will spike the cost. But if you look at some of the new estates that are going up around the island now, which have got non-fossil fuel boilers in, it's not actually spiking the price of those houses compared to other houses on the market in the same bracket.
David?
In the UK, if you put an air source heat pump, you can get a grant for £7,500. What's the grant here?
So in terms of the grants, there's a mixture of grants. There's the Green Energy Grant, of course, and there's the Energy Efficiency Grant. There's the grants that relate to solar powers panels in DFE. But DFE, as part of the transition, we need to look at what the grants are available, and that's already been pledged by government, that there needs to be a review of the grant system to make things affordable. I've spoken in Tynwald before about our race for net zero and actually said that for me, it has to be affordable to the average person. You can't start making stipulations that then put things out of reach for people simply because they can't afford it. You either provide the assistance or you change your targets. And that's always been my position. It'll be my position in Tynwald going forward. And in fact, we've got a debate, I think, they're coming up this month, courtesy of Mr. Peters, who wants us to scrap our net zero targets, if I remember rightly, from what's on the order paper. So it'll be an opportunity for me to speak in that debate again with my views.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, David, good to hear from you. Thanks for that today. We're with Councillor Watson from Douglas City Council. Devon Watson's on Mannin Line from the Housing and Property Committee. And David Ashford MHK, Chair of the Government's Housing and Communities Board. Lots of messages to get to in a moment.
Discover Bath Line, the new name in bathrooms at Haldane Fisher. Visit their brand new bathroom and tiles showroom in Douglas for a stunning range of bathroom styles and designs. Or get inspired online at bathline-bathrooms.im. Whether traditional or contemporary, Bathline's dedicated in-house bathroom designers will bring your dream bathroom to life. Bathline at Haldane Fisher, designed for living.
It's a tough time for businesses. Not sure what to do to turn things around? Let Nicola Bowker & Co. guide you through. We've helped hundreds of businesses to success. Accountants and tax advisors to businesses on the Isle of Man.
Come on. Oh, not again. We need to go to Athol.
They only do Nissan.
Oh, don't be daft. They service and repair all makes and models.
Huh, main dealer prices, though.
Our Nathan says it's not just about the cost per hour, as what one technician does in 3 hours, Athol might do in 1. And you get a courtesy vehicle.
Look at that. Told you we needed to come to Athol.
Oh, be quiet and drive.
The Isle of Man Symphony Orchestra's spectacular gala concert of great British composers will feature a feast of music by Vaughan Williams, Delius, Walton and Elgar, including his famous cello concerto with international soloist Eva Mizerska. An afternoon of brilliant music in the Villa Marina Royal Hall on Sunday the 24th of November. Tickets on sale now.
The momentum is building for the Ravens as they return home looking to continue their good form in the NWCFL Premier Division this weekend. Targeting a 6th straight win, FC Isle of Man host Burscough on Saturday in a fixture that has provided goals galore in recent years. Join me, Rob Pritchard and Tony Mepham for FC Isle of Man versus Burscough, kicking off at 6 p.m. on Saturday. Manx Radio will be bringing you full live match commentary on our DAB and AM 1368 channels. Live coverage of FC Isle of Man on Manx Radio is supported by Selton, investing in our community.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
It's 29 minutes before 1 on Manx Radio, Thursday lunchtime with Devon Watson and David Ashford. And a question, this is in from Terry, who just said, could you ask the panel, we'll call you the panel, is a social housing unit or a council house, let's say, is that a bridge to something else, or is it a house for life? What's your opinion, David?
Well, my view is it's a bridge to something else. Depending upon age, though, of course. Again, it's not as simple as just saying it one way or the other. You may have someone who goes into social housing in their 50s, late 60s, that actually then, obviously, for them, it's effectively pretty much a home for life. But also people's needs change. So one of the things with social housing is you will have people wanting to downsize. And that is one of the challenges as well. You've got to have the properties for them to downsize too. I have lots of constituents in Williston who want to downsize, but there's not really the expansive stock for them to be able to do so. But it is definitely a bridge. It's a start for people to actually be able then to get on in life if they can.
Devon Watson?
I share largely the same idea that what this does is this gives you 5 years worth of stability in order to sort of collect yourself, get things that you need to get right, and then sort of once you no longer need the housing, maybe move into the private market, maybe buy your own house, maybe go forward if housing prices were to become affordable in the future, and then that house becomes freely available for someone else who may need it. I think you've got a lot of people. I think recently Alman today reported that half of people battle to make ends meet. A lot of people couldn't handle a £400 emergency expense. The only thing that separates, I think, 80% of us and from being someone who desperately needs housing is a sudden loss in job, a big company pulling out, a family tragic accident, and we need to have that stock there. And there will be people, of course, if you've got kids in complex circumstances, you could live in a house your entire life, and a lot of those folks form the bedrock of communities. You've got people who live in Williston, who've always lived in Williston, or live in Anakin Pulrose, and they provide such an immense value to their neighbours. They sort of watch the kids, and it's really important that we maintain a sense of community to some extent and don't just have a constant churn of people coming in and out.
There's a big frustration with young families who are trapped in private rentals and see absolutely no way out because they're shelling out above £1,000 a month sometimes to rent somewhere, have no hope of ever putting a deposit together. Do you see social housing as an answer to that problem?
Yeah, 100%, and I'll let David sort of give a more expansive view in a while, because social housing doesn't sit separate from the private market. Social housing is an aspect of the private market. So if we built 100 new homes, and we put people into those, then that is 100 homes in the private sector that are suddenly free and available for other folks to sort of move into. So what happens is if we can increase total housing supply on our end, we can reduce some of those supply constraints that we have in the private market, because that supply constraint is the core thing that is driving high housing costs.
Devon's just hit the nail on the head there. That's exactly it. We've had this discussion again before, Andy, that you can't look at different aspects of housing in isolation. Everything gels together. So if you don't have the social housing available, those people are going to be sat in the private rental market, in a market they can't afford. And what that does is it increases the demand on the rental sector, and it actually drives up rental prices, because obviously in any form of drive and economy, it's going to go up if there's higher demand. And this is exactly what we're probably seeing at the moment, I would suggest, along with several other factors. So actually providing more social housing, which is one of the key things that is stated in the objective assessment of housing need, and will be a key feature of the government response to that as well, is that we actually need to start building social housing, and that then has a knock-on effect into other housing sectors as well.
Okay, could you and I think I may have put this to you before, so forgive me if I have, why doesn't Douglas Council, or any of the councils, build a big tower block?
Well, I'm not sure a big tower block is necessarily what you want. It's not just about delivering 100 flats, bang, there you go. It's about having the right type of housing and housing that people actually want. It's not just about putting a roof over people's heads. It's about, as Devon mentioned earlier, the quality of housing and the standard of it, and giving people appropriate places to live. Shoving up some great tenement block that looks like it's out of the 1960s and 70s, it might tick a box in terms of getting people off a waiting list and into a home. But is that the type of homes we really want for people, or people want for themselves? I would suggest it's not.
Devon? So, yeah, you've got those big buildings in China. They can house up to 20,000 people. Build one of those, problem solved, right? Like, that is everyone housed. And that's actually, no, that's not something we're going to do. That's not a joke I'm going to make on here. But it's one of those things where theoretically you could sort of build one giant block or build sort of those container housing or modular housing and just house an incredible number of people. But there is one thing that does emerge, is that there's nothing as permanent as a temporary solution, right? And we've seen this in schools where they knock up a container to get a new classroom, and that becomes the classroom for the next 20, 30 years. That is just a thing. And this is housing, right? So if we sort of throw things up that do cause social problems, that do have issues, then you end up having a scenario where this temporary solution that fixes the problem now, in 2060, when my kids are sort of like talking about politics over here, then they will be dealing with those problems down the road. So we have to build for the future.
Okay.
And I think, just to say, Andy, very quickly, I think also one of the key points, it's worth emphasising that Lord Street, when it was built, was seen as a temporary solution originally.
Really?
When the Barrack Street slums were all cleared round there. And how temporary was that? It was there for a long time. And the other thing I always point out to people, so I'll take an opportunity to do it again, is my full title. I'm not just chair of the Housing Board, I'm chair of the Housing and Communities Board. And what we want to be doing is building communities. And that's just as crucial when we build housing.
Okay, Stephen, you're live with David Ashford and Devon Watson. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, Andy. Hello, gentlemen, and hello, listeners. If I could just speak about a slightly different subject, but it's still on housing ultimately, and that is on Monday evening this coming Monday, the Positive Action Group is holding the second of its meetings, and we've got Andrew Nielsen of the Howard League for Penal Reform. Now, the Howard League for Penal Reform is a leading prison reform charity headquartered in London. Its objectives are to seek reform of the criminal justice system with a view to seeking reduced crime, safer communities, and fewer people in prison. But what I want to talk about with you two gents is that a few weeks ago I read in the papers and heard on Manx Radio there was a person put in prison because there was no suitable hostel accommodation for them. And I read today again in the Manx Independent another young person who is awaiting hearing. There was no, he had an adjournment, and there was no, he had no fixed address, so he was remanded at the Isle of Man prison. Now, don't you think this is with all the other problems going on with housing, but this is so fundamental to people, not only for people who are awaiting their trials, but also when they come out of prison, there doesn't appear to be any bail place or hostel provided either by central government or, dare I say it, the council, because these are residents, some of them will be residents of the city of Douglas. So what are your comments on this particular issue of people where prison is being used as a hostel rather than for its true purpose?
Okay, David.
Well, from my point of view, it's deeply concerning. Prison shouldn't be being used in any way, shape or form as an accommodation centre. I am aware of the two particular cases, and I believe in one of them there was a solution found eventually, particularly around someone who was due for release from prison but didn't have anywhere to go. There is the emergency housing pathway, which can be utilised if necessary, but there is also, we have to remember, a lot of the people, particularly ones who are awaiting sentence for something, sometimes there can be bail conditions on them as well. So, for instance, if there's actual alcohol offences involved, they're not allowed to go anywhere near licensed premises. So that means that, for instance, some of the B&B accommodation that could be provided for them, if that B&B holds a licence, they can't be put up there because they'd actually be in breach of their bail conditions. So there is some nuancing with certain individuals that makes it very difficult to find them emergency accommodation if they need it. And that's the same from those being released from prison. I know, for instance, there's been one particular case very recently of someone being released that has taken a long while to solve. It has now been solved. But yeah, we need to ensure that bail accommodation is right. And I know that the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs has been looking at this within the Department of Home Affairs, because I've raised it previously. And we need to make sure that that is absolutely right, because nobody should be staying in prison simply because there isn't appropriate accommodation for them.
Devon Watson?
Yeah, 100%. And this goes sort of beyond that issue. I think you're touching on a larger issue in general, is a lot of people who leave care really battle to find housing. A lot of people who don't have stable family arrangements don't have any ability to have housing. And then you end up having institutions, and I spoke to this slightly in the programme, that aren't built for this, but end up accommodating this, such as the criminal justice system, such as the prison, such as the hospital, end up filling in the gaps in the places where the housing market has completely failed to accommodate people. Yeah, so we absolutely need to increase that supply and create that pathway and rebuild that sort of a homelessness strategy.
And just to follow on from Devon there, particularly in the care element, that's one of the reasons that this administration has actually changed the rules around care leavers. Previously, when you left care, that was it. Cut off, you're on your own, run free, so to speak. And a lot of people were not in a position to be able to do that. It was causing serious problems. So that is why it's been amended now, that there is help and support for people after they leave care as well, for as long as they really need, up to now really their mid-20s.
Okay, Stephen?
Well, I hear what's been said, but I fear that there's no substance or real resolution at the moment.
What would you like to see, Stephen?
Well, I think a proper bail hostel or a hostel which can take care of people with a warden, not a prison warden, but a warden who can offer help and guidance, both to people who are maybe going through the system or when they're released and need the comfort of a hostel and a home where they can call theirs for a period of time.
I'm just trying to think, what happened to David Gray House?
I've no idea.
What happened, David Ashford?
So my understanding is it wasn't getting the volume of people through to actually be able to make it able to be supported.
Right.
But one of the things I would say, Stephen, since you asked there about substance, I can actually say there are people coming out of prison going into the emergency housing pathway that are being found temporary accommodation. So these are real life examples. There is the odd case where, like I say, due to the circumstances of the person's bail conditions, that it's very, very hard to get them temporary accommodation. Because of certain things they are and aren't allowed to do. But what also with them going into the emergency accommodation does is it also then leads to the pathway of trying to find them somewhere more permanent, because one of the things you're quite right on, Stephen, is what's needed is stability for those people in their lives, because if they don't get that stability, then their chance of reoffending and ending up back in prison and it all starting all over again is greatly increased.
I also do think that with regards to, so could the council do something about this? And the legislation that governs us is quite strict on residency requirements. So you have to have been a resident within the city for at least 5 years and on the island for 10. And sometimes people who have complex circumstances move around rapidly, maybe they don't really meet those requirements. So either that legislation needs to change in order for us to sort of look at sort of providing that sort of homelessness shelter, or this is arguably probably something that sort of central government needs to sort of grab a handle on. But I don't see any issue with us sort of going out of our way to sort of work with charities, give up properties that we don't necessarily need to those entities, or sort of working to sort of provide solutions there. That's something I'm desperate to sort of see dealt with.
Okay, Stephen, final word?
Well, possibly it would be beneficial for all parties to come along and hear what Andrew Nielsen, the guest speaker, has got to say on these subjects. I'm sure he's dealt with these issues before. And
whereabouts is the meeting, Stephen? Where is it?
So the meeting is at the Manx Legion in Douglas on Monday evening, this coming Monday. Doors open 7 o'clock for a 7:30 start.
Okay, we appreciate that. Thanks for raising that, Stephen. Devon Watson, it's interesting, and I'm starting to piece together. You're talking about putting public money, if you like, in the right place, so it benefits the tenant and it benefits society, because, as you say, if people with complex circumstances go into private rental, sometimes the state ends up paying that anyway.
Yeah, you end up having the situation where instead of sort of spending, because I think there is this big issue where maybe past administrations have been penny wise and sort of pound foolish, right? Where you save money by not building social housing right when interest rates are at 0% right after the financial crisis. And now we pay far more than that in paying housing benefit for slum accommodation that is in far worse conditions, that there are no regulations, that causes greater issues at the end of the day. So we need to right now start spending to sort of in 5, 10, 15 years from now, that these issues are solved so that our predecessors can focus on sort of the healthcare and the pension system.
Okay, David Ashford, now the Housing and Communities Board has published that 6-month progress report on the homelessness strategy. What is the progress?
So the progress at the moment is we've supported, because I'm all in favour of practical things, Andy, as you know. We've supported a large number of people. There's 27 people currently being supported through the pathways, and 1 family as well, I believe. So it is having a real life impact on people. We've also been able to find people much more permanent accommodation, and also a lot of these people who present, they also need support from the wraparound services. So some support maybe from adult social care or children's social care, or indeed mental health team, and we've been able to put in place support packages for them as well.
Okay, thank you, Neil in Douglas. He said the old Braddon Commissioners building will be good as a hostel, and a message in more messages coming in about Williston. Everybody's getting very excited about Williston and the builders' vans and everything. We'll get to those in just a few moments' time, and more of your comments, text, email, call and WhatsApp on Housing with David Ashford and Devon Watson.
Mannin Line.
All aboard for the Polar Express train ride this December. You've seen the film, now live the magic as we journey from Douglas to the North Pole. Meet the characters from the Polar Express. Enjoy hot chocolate and cookies before you get to meet the main man, Santa. For timetables and to book, ask your family to call 662525 or visit rail.im.
Housing, benefits or employment issues, faulty goods, bad workmanship, financial problems and relationship breakdowns. We all run into difficulties in life, and it can feel like there's no one who can help you sort them out. But at Manx Citizens Advice Service, we can help. As an independent charity, we offer free, confidential support covering all sorts of areas. You don't need an appointment. Just call in at Promenade Church, Loch Promenade, Douglas, or call 366 338. Open Tuesdays from 12:30 till 3 and Fridays 10 till 12:30. Manx Citizens Advice Service. Your advice service.
Sorrel has a special Christmas gift just for you. For the first time ever, there's a discount on our famous candle and perfume making workshops. Book a workshop with family or friends and use the code CHRISTMAS. Discount also applies to vouchers that you can gift to someone special. Don't miss this limited offer. Spaces are filling fast. Book now at sorrel.im to secure your spot and experience the magic of Sorrel this holiday season. Use code CHRISTMAS at the checkout. Merry Christmas from all of us at Sorrel.
Walk through the Christmas wonderland at Ramsey Garden Centre for a magical range of trees, decorations, unique gifts and much more, including the widest range of indoor and outdoor lights. Christmas at Ramsey Garden Centre, open 7 days a week.
Radio Caroline North is back on the air this weekend, live from our historic radio ship Ross Revenge. This month, in addition to the usual virtual cash prizes to spend in our web shop, we have extra prizes for our lucky winners. Signed copies of 3 novels written by last month's special guest, Mark Wesley. It all starts this Saturday morning at 10, straight after Carnaby Street. Online and on 1368 AM on Radio Caroline North.
The Mannin Line with Andy Wint.
Councillor Devon Watson from Douglas City Council is in, and also David Ashford, MHK. We're talking about housing. Good afternoon, Andy. Sheila, I'll get to your question in a moment, but Stella's on first. Hello, Stella.
Oh, hello, Andy.
You're live with our guests.
Am I live? I'm going out to the world, am I?
Indeed.
Indeed. Your guest, one of your guests, was saying about people nowhere for them to go when they come out of prison.
Yeah.
No probation, lack of housing generally on the island. Well, I was warden at Coonamary in Ramsey for 30 years, myself and my late husband. There was 55 flats there, and we lived in the bungalow between the two buildings. It was perfect accommodation when it was built at the time for elderly people. No, I did some study in health studies when I was 47, and I did some researches, and I suggested then that it could be utilised for young people, not necessarily elderly, because the building was, a bit dated, and they had to do lots of adaptations for elderly people, whereby it would have been perfect for young people, mobile and fit and healthy, But that, of course, that didn't go down very well. But now, Coonamary is standing empty. There's 55 flats there with kitchens, one bedroom and bathroom, and all the facilities were there. I could speak to anybody in any flat from my bungalow, so I could practically run the building from my house, and I was on call possibly 24/7. But I was allowed, myself and my husband were allowed to run the place. So we got to know everybody that lived there, and you could sense when there's going to be a problem. Or I know I'm rambling on a bit, but that sort of accommodation would have been absolutely perfect for young people coming out of prison.
Okay, David Ashford?
Yeah, so one of the things I've been really pushing for as chair of the Housing Communities Board is it's always great to talk about brand shiny new things, but we also need to make best use of what we've already got. And obviously there's a mention there of Ramsey, but something even closer to my constituency and Devon, and actually probably in Devon's, I think, with the ward boundaries now, is Retna Bay, where Retna Bay is, of course, due to become empty. And that's one of the things we are looking at, is what can we do with that? That's in the remit of the Department of Health and Social Care. What can we do to actually ensure that continues in use and doesn't just become another vacant brownfield site? I've said as a Douglas MHK for many, many years, and I think many times on this show, Andy, one of the most disgraceful things is if you look at the brownfield sites around Douglas, they're all in government ownership. We should be driving this. We should be getting those sites back into use. Park Road site, Victoria Road site, all those things are useful for housing development.
So Retna Bay is habitable, it's livable then?
It is. I mean, not as a nursing home, of course, which is currently a residential home as it currently is, because times have moved on a bit, like as we've just been talking about there up in Ramsey. But it can be used for other things with a bit of work done to it, but not excessive work.
So what do you anticipate is going to happen when everybody goes to the new Summerhill?
So again, I don't want to preempt plans that are in development, but I think there's a mix of things we can actually do. So things around the homelessness strategy that can be used for, things around accommodation for young people. There's a whole mix of things. I'm not going to preempt the policy that's in development, but I equally agree about there up in Ramsey as well. We've got sites around the island that might not be brand new and shiny, but they can serve a purpose. And certainly I can assure anyone listening that is what I've been pushing for as chair of the Housing Communities Board. All
right, Stella, appreciate your call, Stella. Thanks for that.
Okay, yeah.
Good to hear from you. Sheila dropped me a note in and she said, both of your guests talk about 21st century social housing, but tenants aren't paying 21st century rent. Young people who don't meet the threshold for social housing are paying astronomical rent, yet there are many living in social housing who earn more than the threshold because of old terms and conditions, but continue to live in social housing for minimal rent, says Sheila. This isn't fair. It's about time social housing was means tested. Pay your fair share according to what you earn. If you earn more, you pay more. Those who really, really need help will still get it. So, Devon Watson.
Okay, sure. This is actually something I'm really keen to answer because this is already the status quo. People are means tested on their way into social housing, and at the time of contract renewal, people are put on 5-year fixed-term tenancies. This happens, about 75% of people have already been moved on to that. People who do earn more than slightly over their threshold do pay more, and then people who hit that cap at the end of the day, people who earn too much to be in social housing altogether, the total number of them is 3. Out of almost 5,000 tenants, the total number is 3. So even if we kick these 3 people out, or whatever, if this is the preferred solution, then that doesn't solve the housing crisis in any appreciable way, and at the same time you lose that additional rent they're paying. I do think that at some point people should move on, but at the same time, I'm not going to discuss their specific circumstances, but some people might have high incomes, but at the same time they've got a critical medical issue, or they've got a family crisis that causes huge issues. And it's also about, at the same time, the problem with means testing in a really, really aggressive way is that you lose the ability to take in account of individual human circumstances.
Okay. And also regarding, I think it's worth restating, because people may not be aware of this unless it applies to you personally, is that it is 5-year contracts now, isn't it?
So, I mean, there are people obviously still on the old contracts, but they are slowly whittling down, which is what the caller referenced. But the number of people, particularly in Douglas, because of all the work that's been going on, particularly in Williston and so on, the number of those tenants still on legacy contracts, as I'd call them, is getting less and less. But it is important to dispel a myth as well, because there is this myth out there that there's a lot of very rich people sat in social housing. It's not. Even back in the days before we had the 5-year contracts, when I was chairman of of housing at Douglas, the estimate was it was just under 1% of tenants. So when you put it into that context, and Devon pointing out about the 3 that are over the limit, that really shows that social housing is being utilised for those who really, really do need it.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
98% of people earn beneath the threshold.
Okay.
And at the same time, if we raise those rents, less money in the private economy.
Thank you. We've got to go. Thanks to Devon Watson and David Ashford. We're back with an open line tomorrow.
WINT. Start your journey at